Hello and welcome to Buy Africa, the show where we focus on investment opportunities around the continent. I'm Tshepo, Modiba, and thanks for joining me. Tonight, I'm joined by Maurice Madiba, not Modiba, founding director, Cloud Atlas Investing. Maurice, thank you for having us. How are you doing today? You good?
I'm keeping well, thanks. It's my first TV interview.
This
so
is
I'm
exciting.
pretty excited, yeah.
This is exciting. Your critical focus as a business is on index trackers, yes?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Spanning the continent, do you want to touch a little bit on the business as a whole? What type of offering you have?
Yeah. So we've got a Pan-African set of indices called the AMI series.
Right.
We look at both a Pan-Africa XSA exposure as well as looking at sector-specific exposure, such as banks, food and beverage, retail, real estate.
So you get to touch on a theme if you want to.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. So, for example, one of the themes that comes out of it is the African consumer theme.
Right.
You know, if you look at your food and beverage, you look at your real estate, that's one of the things that our set of indices offers. So, you know, the indices have been around, they've got a 5-year history and done by Thomson Reuters.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, African consumer. You touch a little bit on the African consumer. Certainly 3-4 years ago, this was talk of the town, right? Everybody was talking about for the next decade, this is where you're going to make money. Is that really still the case?
Yeah, most definitely. Like if I look at the performance of some of the sectors where the African consumer plays a big role, so your food and beverage is an example, you start to see the performance numbers over 5 years producing something close to 200%.
Right, that's of the index as a whole.
Of the index,
right,
in terms of return. But there's a lot of different dynamics because, you know, this is a Pan-African offering.
Right.
But when you're looking at country-specific, it's a very different story.
Right.
So, you know, African consumer is driven by a lot of different themes. So one of those themes being an increase in the population, generally. An increase in the income, so GDP per capita starting to increase quite a bit.
Right.
And then the last one is, obviously the rising incomes, but what is the nature of the consumer? So are they your more affluent consumers or are they your broad-based, more large-scale consumers?
Right.
And then the other one is looking at how do you use those dynamics on a country-by-country basis. So consumers in Nigeria differ quite a bit from consumers in Botswana.
Right.
Likewise, even Botswana and Zambia have very different consumption patterns.
Right.
So being able to analyze that on a country-by-country basis, you know, you're able to get good companies out of that, but then also attack the opportunity as a whole, you know, as a theme.
Now, in terms of buying the index, let's go to food and beverages as an example. Are you then able to tap into the different types of spending patterns from Nigeria to Botswana, as you touched on? Yeah.
The nice thing about that is because it is an index, it's grouped, it's got the diversity. So investors when they invest in Africa always have to ask 100 different questions.
Right.
Number one, what is this market? But when you go into an index type of a structure, you're actually investing with the diversity that Africa offers, X of SA.
Right.
So you end up getting things in Nigeria without having to consider what is the consumption pattern in Nigeria, what is the consumption pattern, you know, in the other countries.
Right. And what are the types of underlying businesses in the food and beverages index, as an example?
So a lot of them sugar. There's some sugar companies in there. There's also some milling companies, which are probably the most popular, most common in Africa at this stage.
Okay.
And I touch on sugar because recently Associated British Foods is looking to buy Illovo sugar.
Right.
You know, so you ask yourself, with the sugar price being so low and the environment being so difficult to trade on, why would they do such a transaction? But it's really driven by what they mentioned, you know, rising populations, rising income levels. And they sort of see a Pan-Africa player like Illovo, which is in 6 different African countries, as the best way to go into the continent. There's not a whole lot of listings similar to other markets that cater to food and beverage. So in Africa, we're really looking at milling companies, a few agricultural companies and what have you.
Right.
But we still have to get up the scale in terms of getting food processing companies that start to list.
And that's really a function of the types of businesses that are listed?
At the moment.
Okay. Okay. Now, exploring, I guess, the African consumer theme a bit further, you touch on food and beverages. What else touches on that within the indices?
So also real estate,
Right.
which is quite a big one, but it's a very cyclical type of sector.
Right.
So at the moment, it's experiencing quite a bit of upside after a few years of downside, as you can imagine.
Okay.
So real estate, we all need a place to sleep, a place to work, and a place to go on holiday.
Right.
And that's what that sector sort of offers us. So in terms of weightings, I would look at food and beverage being the highest weight, and then real estate also making quite a huge chunk of the exposure.
And in terms of market cap, food and beverage is a lot bigger?
Yeah, most definitely.
Okay.
I mean, because people always eat.
Right.
You know, if you can't sleep, you're definitely going to have a meal or have a drink.
Right.
So food and beverage is also big because of the function of brewery companies. So alcoholic beverages or your Delta breweries, Tanzanian breweries, Nigerian breweries, East African breweries is in there as well.
Right.
So in South Africa, you know, with SAB Miller being bought out, that was quite a huge transaction.
Right.
So it just gives you the sheer size that food and beverage does actually make up quite a huge chunk.
Now that's a nice, I guess, blend of type of businesses, the beverages and specifically the, East African breweries, as you touch on, and then agri-businesses coming through in that index as well. Are you seeing a lot of traction in terms of investor appetite for the product?
Yeah, most definitely. We are coming to market pretty soon. So we've been marketing, asking investors, what do you find interesting?
Right.
And looking at food and beverages, for them, a staple.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more on the defensive side. It's a non-cyclical stock.
Right.
So they sort of see value in investing in something like that when it comes to Africa, because Africa is considered risky.
Right.
And one of the things,
I like how you say considered. It might not necessarily be risky.
It's probably the least riskiest places at the moment,
right.
in the world.
But investors are what investors are.
Because the sentiment drives it. But you look at the retail, there's another sort of theme, another sector that feeds into the consumer theme.
Right.
But there's no liquidity in retail.
Right.
So you get a lot of liquidity in your food and beverage, which is what makes it a lot more attractive, especially when it comes to Africa, because that's one of the key words of investing is liquidity.
Right.
Is there liquidity?
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess in a way, constructing an index addresses some of the liquidity concerns.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's go back to the real estate discussion. Does that span across residential, commercial properties or listed property businesses?
Yeah, most definitely.
Okay.
The other thing about it is it's very overweight North African countries.
Right.
So Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't have a lot of real estate listings.
So a lot of Egypt.
A lot of Egypt,
Right.
Tunisia, Morocco is quite in there. Not necessarily in the south. We've got some in Botswana, some in Kenya.
Right.
Nigeria is still to come up quite a bit. And we have to get liquidity first before we include the stock in our index.
Right.
So, we're looking at those markets to see what they bring in the next couple of years.
Right. So I guess by virtue of the type of businesses that are listed in each market, then the index will be weighted accordingly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of it is driven towards, your residential, as you did ask, your residential and your commercial properties.
Right.
But as you see with increasing urbanization, which is another theme about the African consumer,
Mm-hmm.
the one way that urbanization is going to increase is through a lot of real estate development.
Right.
Because we have to be able to absorb the populations coming from the rurals into the urban area.
Right.
So that is going to be quite a huge growth sector in Africa over the next couple of years.
Right.
It just depends on which angle they end up going for. Is it, yeah.
Okay. And I guess the other potential theme is the fairly young population. How do these indices help you take advantage of that particular story?
I think the one thing about the young population is they're very well connected.
Right.
So you look at one of the indices we have is telecommunications. Now, the telecommunications sector in Africa is still to achieve its full potential or reach its capacity.
Right.
Though mobile penetration has increased quite a bit across the continent, somewhere close to about 60%.
Right.
On average. So if you look at those type of numbers, people have access to technology, access to information. And the people that are most likely to use that is your young population. You know, so it makes a distribution of, or online selling as an example, quite more achievable in Africa as opposed to 5 or 10 years ago. Even fintech businesses such as moving money, the one that is in Kenya.
Right.
Yeah. So, and South Africa is also looking to do something similar to that. Tanzania has also come out with people can trade shares on their phone.
Right.
You know, so you're seeing a lot of developments geared towards people that have appetite for technology, which is going to be your young population.
Right.
And as you start to take this up, it's going to just feed a lot more into their consumption because they have a lot more access into consumption.
Right. This is actually quite a nice discussion in that, again, all of these different themes that we've been talking about over the years, there's very tangible ways to access it via these indices.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in particular, again, going back to the real estate discussion, you touched on, is there some sort of guidance as to whether we're likely to see expansion of real estate listed businesses or listed property rather across the rest of the continent? Yeah,
I see a huge gap for that. If you look at SA, we've got a lot of real estate listings. You know, so SA is a unique market compared to the rest of Africa.
Right.
But you look at Egypt and what they're looking to do around the Suez Canal, redevelop that. There's also, government has quite a good imperative in terms of looking at infrastructure development. And that goes hand in hand with real estate across the different economies. So Nigeria being the biggest at the moment,
right.
They're looking at infrastructure quite a bit, looking for funds from IMF and China.
Yeah.
You know, to push infrastructure projects, which is just going to translate into a bigger real estate sort of market. And then would likely see in a few years some real estate listings or even REITs starting to list on these different markets. And as that happens, then I think that's when we'll see real estate listings go across the continent.
Perfect. Let's leave it there.
Yeah.
Thanks to my guest, Maurice Madiba, Founding Director at Cloud Atlas Investing. That's all from Buy Africa this week. Remember to follow me on Twitter. That's at Modiba_Tshepo. And send us your thoughts about the show using the hashtag Buy Africa. For myself and the team, goodbye.